Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Alan Hathaway. I'm glad you joined me for this particular message today. I want to talk to you about heartburn versus burning heart. And this will be taken from Psalm 39, verses 1 through 4. I was fascinated by particularly the man Patrick. And really, that's what kind of started my interest in Be Thou My Vision as a hymn. But what I discovered many years ago when I read the book How the Irish Saved Civilization, I discovered a man that I never knew had existed. His name was Patrick. I had the images of him that we learn in childhood. I have the legendary stuff that we hear, and a lot of the kind of outlandish kinds of stories about him. But when I actually began to read his words in Thomas Cahill's book, I came to understand that this was a man that was quite different than what I had come to believe or come to understand based on popular culture and actually even popular Christian culture. He was a very unique and different man. Patrick was born sometime around the year 383. He was about 15 years old when he was taken into captivity sometime around the year 400. His captivity would last around 6 years. He would return to his native land of Britain, West Britain, actually, in the country we now call, or the part of Britain we call Wales. And in returning there, he would come back a man with a lot of struggles. Most of his family was gone. Most of the things that he had intended or been a part of were gone. He had, while he was in Ireland, back to his Christian faith. As a teenager, he had lost that faith. It may very well have had something to do with the death of his father. His father was a cavalry officer for the Roman legions. And during that particular period of time, from about 383 up until about 430, the Irish and brigands within Britain itself were making raids all over the countryside. They were robbing people, killing people, stealing stuff, and capturing people to sell into slavery. His father was killed sometime before he turned 15 in a skirmish with these brigands. It left him by himself. The other thing that he looked at was a Roman society that was clearly in collapse. Because of his station in society as a minor noble, he would be forced to join the curia. The curia was sort of the town council that levied taxes. But unlike our tax system, the people who levied the taxes, if they didn't collect enough, had to make up the taxes, and they were the curia. It was not a choice to run for that office. You received it because of your family history. And so Patrick was looking at that, as were many young men. During that time in Britain, as the Roman Empire was collapsing and taxes became more and more burdensome, the young men in the young British families would literally flee the land of Britain and go other places to avoid being forced into the curia. And that was one of the realities that many of them lived with, especially when they came to be age 16, because at that point they were considered within Roman law to be of age to take financial and other responsibilities within the society. And so that's what was Patrick was looking at. But that was all cut short by an event that happened late at night. Irish pirates came up the river system and they landed near the villa where Patrick lived. They captured many of the servants that belonged to Patrick's family, and they captured Patrick and two of his sisters. They dragged them away to Ireland to be sold as slaves. We don't know what happened to Patrick's sisters. In fact, we don't know what happened to the other people taken with him at the time. We just know that it was a harrowing experience for this young man who was in his 15th year. There in Ireland, he was purchased by a Druid priest. The Druid priest set him out in the fields to watch the cattle and the sheep. He was a shepherd. And he spent hours and hours by himself, very often hungry because not much food was given to him. As he worked with the despair of that situation, he once again turned back toward his Christian faith and asked God to become part of his life, to come back into his heart and change the circumstances of his life. It changed him first. He began to spend more time thinking about what God wanted in his life, and more time praying, and more time remembering the material he had learned as a child. One night, when he was around 21 years of age, he had a voice vision that said to him, "Patrick, arise and go to the coast. There is a ship waiting for you." Patrick got up and left. That was a dangerous thing for Patrick to do. Slaves in Celtic Ireland who attempted to run away were viewed as useless and very often were sacrificed to the Celtic gods as a threat to other slaves to not behave in the same manner. The executions were brutal and very often extremely painful. And so Patrick was looking at that reality. It was also something he had to think about when he returned to Ireland many years later as a missionary, because there was, unlike the Roman world, there was not a statute of limitation on slavery. You were always considered a slave, and so your master could reclaim you. And we know that Patrick spent at least 60 days in jail at one point and went before magistrates in Ireland, and that may well have been because of his earlier flight from slavery in Ireland. It is an interesting story to learn about what this man experienced. When he came back to Britain as a young man, having skipped over all of the traditional schooling that most young men in the Roman world would have received, he felt his lack of education, his lack of understanding. Part of his desire was to enter the ministry and serve Christ. And so he spent his time learning and went actually to Gaul, which is modern France, to spend time there learning and developing his thinking as a Christian. The British bishops, because of his history and because of his situation, didn't think much of Patrick and didn't desire to help him along in ministry. When he was in Gaul, he was ordained and set forth. And when he returned to Britain, the British bishops sidelined this young man until he was well into his 30s. During that period of time, he had a vision of a man coming over from Ireland. He called him Victorinus. And Victorinus brought with him a book which was entitled The Voices of the Irish. And it was a call for him to return to Ireland, to walk among the Irish people and share with them the message of the gospel. When he went to the leadership of the British church, they refused outright to allow him to collect a group of people or raise funds or do anything to prepare himself to go to Ireland. And so he waited patiently for approval from the bishops. In the meantime, they sent another missionary to Britain from Gaul to the Irish. It was a decided failure. The man was there for less than a year when the High King of Ireland literally told him, "You leave Ireland or else." And so he returned to England and ministered in Britain among the Welsh and among the Irish settlers that had settled on that coastline and among the Britons themselves. But he never returned to Ireland. Patrick, a few years after him, finally got the approval of his bishops to go to Ireland to share the faith. Very often we think that God's timing is not fast enough in our world. We tend to believe that God, if he knew what he was doing, would make things happen quicker. And I'm sure Patrick felt that way. But Patrick had a burning desire to fulfill God's purpose and his will. Sometime between the year 340 and 350, 440 and 450, Patrick returned to Ireland as a missionary. He brought with him a large group of people who felt the need to reach the Irish with the gospel. They weren't received well at first, but because of his determination, his faithfulness, and his genuine concern for the Irish people, he began winning them over. And before long, there were large numbers of people coming to him asking to be baptized and brought into the Christian faith. He would transform Ireland in the years that followed. He was a man with a burning passion for God. And when you read his confessions, you feel that burning passion that he has. He was also a man deeply committed to justice. When a British warlord who was a king in Britain came across and captured Irish Christians for the slave trade in Pickland, or what we now call Scotland, Patrick sent a stinging letter to this man who claimed he was a Christian and called him an anathema, or a person who is outside of the Christian faith, and told the churches of Britain to excommunicate him. This did not sit well with the bishops in Britain, and they trumped up a trial against him and brought him up on charges. It is those charges that forced Patrick to write his confession and send it to other bishops around what had been the Roman Empire. In doing that, he left for us a record. We not only have his confession of how he came to his Christian faith, but we also have his letter, and we understand all the forces that were at work around this man. He was a man of tremendous courage. I think sometimes we think that we have to be flashy, or we have to be important, or we have to dress well, or we have to impress people. But the thing that really impresses people is when we have a heart for God, when we desire his will above everything else. In Psalm 39, verses 1 through 4, it says, "I said, I will guard my ways, that I may not sin with my tongue. I will guard my mouth with a muzzle, so long as the wicked are in my presence. I was mute and silent. I held peace to no avail, and my distress grew worse. My heart became hot within me as I mused and the fire burned. Then I spoke with my tongue. O Lord, make me know my end, and what is the measure of my days. Let me know how fleeting I am. Patrick would live a long life. According to most understandings of his death date, he lived to be almost 100 years old and was honored and respected by the Irish people for his faithfulness and service. It was because he had a burning passion for Christ. I hope you have a burning passion for Christ. God bless you. Hope you'll join us for church this coming Sunday. God bless. Take care.